You being here today. This is a huge event, and I can tell, and I'm not going to mention any names, but there's at least one person in the crowd that I tried all of last year to get to come to Rotary, and he ignored me over and over and suddenly is here in the audience today. So,
well, then we certainly won't call on him for a question. I don't know who it is, but that's usually the career-ending, game-changer individual. So.
We've got a lot of ground that we're going to cover. I know there were some topics that were important to you that we worked on with staff to build some questions in. We'll cover some parts of the LEARNS Act. We're going to cover the Natural State Initiative, economic development. But first, before we dive into that, I wanted to give you an opportunity to give us a state of the state and update us on these first 7 months.
Absolutely. First, thank you so much for having me. It is an honor to carry on the tradition and get to be part of this event here today. So, I have an incredible team. I think one of the best and brightest staffs of any governor anywhere in the country. And they do a great job preparing me for events, giving advice along the way. But I've found that sometimes the best advice that I ever get is from one of our 3 children. My husband, Brian, is here with me this morning. And as Ross mentioned, we have 3 kids, Scarlett, Huck, and George. They are 11, 9, and 8. So we do chaos at our house really well, but our kids are certainly not shy on sharing their opinions. And our youngest, George, is probably one of the more outspoken 8-year-olds you will ever encounter. And George told me not too long ago, "Mom, I know you're going to do another one of those events. Please do not give one of those really long, boring political speeches. No one likes them." So I'm working on tailoring my remarks and keeping them a lot shorter and really focusing on a little bit of substance and then jumping into the Q&A portion today. We feel like we have really taken this role and this opportunity by storm and just finished one of the most, obviously I'm biased, but that's okay because I have the microphone, but successful legislative sessions that we've had ever in the state of Arkansas over the last couple of months. And not only are we, I think, taking the Capitol and the legislative session to a whole new level, but things at the governor's mansion as well. Our kids are the first elementary-aged kids to live back in the governor's mansion since Chelsea Clinton. And so it is a whole new ball game, and we have a lot of Nerf wars and fun activities. We had a slip and slide in the backyard yesterday, but our kids are certainly shaking things up as well. And a few weeks ago, I walked outside. I knew the boys were going out to play in the backyard, and I go out, I look for them, I don't see them, and I hear voices coming from the front. I walk around to the front yard, and they have, I know this is a family-friendly event, but they'd stripped down to their underwear, and they were swimming in the front fountain. And I went up to our 8 and 9-year-old, and I said, "Guys, what in the world are you doing? Like, this is not a swimming pool. You cannot do this." George looked up at me and he goes, "Mom, be cool." He goes, "It's shallow. It's not like we're going to drown or anything. Just be cool." So in the great advice of the brilliant theologian and my 8-year-old son, George, I'm going to try to be cool and, keep things quick so that we can spend a lot of time on taking questions from you all. But we set out this year quickly after taking office with a few very clear objectives. One of the biggest and most important things that I wanted to focus on, that I spent 2 years talking about pretty extensively on the campaign trail, was the fact that our education system here in Arkansas was not meeting the standard that we needed to provide the highest quality education possible for every single student in the state. I knew we could do better, and so we set out and spent a tremendous amount of time traveling the state, frankly, traveling the country, talking to stakeholders, looking at what other states were doing that was working that we weren't, and really took a completely comprehensive approach to transforming the status quo. I don't know if anyone here was satisfied, but I certainly wasn't with seeing our state continue to be 48th and 49th and 50th, frankly, in every category that not only I want to be first and second, but I know we're capable of being there. And so we built what I think is one of the most transformative education reform packages, certainly in our state's history, but probably anywhere in the country, that will really lift every student up and make sure that they have access to that quality education. I'm very proud of the fact that we worked hard to build, pass, and now are implementing Arkansas Learns here in the state, that we will be able to see lives changed and students have that greater opportunity and greater access. I'm a big believer that despite the fact all of the things you see going on in the world that can make you think that the end is near, that we still live in the most amazing country on the face of the planet. And one of the greatest things about being an American is that it doesn't matter where you start, you get to decide where you will finish. And I wanted that to be true right here in Arkansas. I wanted every kid in the state to say, I want to be X, Y, or Z, and have the opportunity to go out and do that and see it achieved. And I think that education is one of the greatest platforms and foundations we can possibly provide to help those students. And so I'm very proud of the fact that we set out to accomplish that, and we were able to do that during this legislative session. Some of the other big priorities are continuing to phase out our state income tax. We have to do that responsibly, certainly not going to happen overnight, but if we want to continue to be competitive with states like Texas and Tennessee, we have to work consistently to phase that out. We made progress on that, and I think we'll be able to continue to do that while still investing big in things like education. One of the other big priorities we had this legislative session was to focus on strengthening our communities by making them safer. We can have the best education system that the country has ever seen. We can have amazing economic development, but if our communities are not safe, if the streets that our kids are growing up on are not safe, then we have not succeeded in our job and our responsibility as government officials. And so we really focused on a couple of key areas that we feel very strongly will help elevate and make our cities and our entire state much safer through the Safer, Stronger Arkansas legislative package. I think we were able to accomplish that. And the last big priority that we had, and certainly I think fits in very well with your motto of the power of fun, is really focusing on what I believe is one of our state's best assets, and that is our natural beauty, really leaning into our state's outdoor economy. I'm a big believer that I have the great opportunity of being Arkansas's chief salesperson and going out and telling our story. And I think we have an unbelievable story to tell. This is one of the most beautifully, culturally rich, historical states anywhere in the country. And a lot of Arkansans don't even know what we have in our backyard. So we want people not just here, but frankly around the world to know what Arkansas has to offer. We want them to come here, frankly spend a lot of their money here in the state of Arkansas and see our tourism industry continue to grow. And I'm confident through the steps we've taken with the Natural State Initiative that my husband Brian has volunteered to lead. He didn't know all the things he was going to get to volunteer to be a part of when he married me 13 years ago. And what an adventure it has been. And he's doing a tremendous job really leaning into kind of that unique selling proposition that we have as a state to go out and help grow our outdoor economy and tell Arkansas' story. So I believe the state of Arkansas is unbelievably strong, and I think we have so many opportunities in front of us, and I look forward to continuing to elevate our state, work with the people in this room to make Arkansas the very best place anywhere, not just frankly in the country, but anywhere in the world to live, to work, and to raise a family.
Appreciate the overview there. We'll drill down. You guys will notice some familiar themes as we kind of walk through the questions. And then we're also going to, inevitably, there will be a follow-up that I miss or something that you came and have a burning question. And the governor's been gracious enough to allow us some time for member questions at the end. So bear with me if I miss one. you can follow up and you can ask. So I want to start with the LEARNS Act. There's certainly no shortage of pieces of that we could discuss, but I wanted to start with the literacy component of that because that's something that's been such a focal point for our club, including last year we launched a literacy lab with the Little Rock School District, seeing exactly the same things that you have. I wonder if you could talk through some of the components of that literacy piece. I know one of them shocked some people, the third grade reading level, and not being able to advance beyond that if you couldn't read at grade level. But frankly, it seems like we've got to do something. And so I wonder if you could kind of walk through that and why you chose some of the things you did around literacy.
Sure. I think that one of the most important things to look at is that the greatest probably data benchmark that we have for any success story in education is all tied back to literacy. If a child is not reading and not meeting that most basic benchmark, particularly by the time they hit that third grade mark, then we know we are setting them up, frankly, and just to be very blunt, for a lifetime of failure. That is one of that critical make or break moments. A child up until third grade is learning to read, and after third grade, they're reading to learn. And if they aren't able to do that, not only do they fall further behind, but it almost becomes impossible to catch up. And so really leaning into that space was absolutely critical. And Arkansas was at the very bottom when it comes to the number of our students that were reading at or above a third grade reading level. There are various different tests and markers that you can look at, but on average, only about 31% of Arkansas third graders were actually meeting that critical benchmark. We know that if a student is not reading also by that point, there is a 70% chance that they will have a lifetime in poverty. If that doesn't startle and scare you and put you back on your heels, that 70% of students who aren't reading by the time they hit third grade are going to live a life of poverty, and only 31% of Arkansas third graders are meeting that benchmark. If that doesn't shake you into making some significant changes, frankly, you shouldn't be part of the solution, because this is an absolutely critical point for our state. We didn't have a single county in the entire state of Arkansas that had more than 50% of their students reading at a third grade or higher level. In fact, 46% was the highest county anywhere in the state of Arkansas for third graders. To me, that is simply unacceptable, because we know that we are setting those kids up for a lifetime of failure. So we had to do something radically different and bring about not just a tinkering of the system, but frankly, we had to flip the tables over and really charge forward and look at what are the best practices. So we looked at what was working in states all across the country. You know it's a problem when you're in Arkansas and you can no longer say, thank God for Mississippi. And frankly, that's the position that we found ourselves in. Mississippi's literacy rates were skyrocketing while Arkansas continued to hover at the bottom. So we looked at what they were doing, and we took language directly out of some of the changes that they made, and we built even more on top of that. One of the biggest things that they did that had a huge amount of impact and success were deploying literacy coaches that were funded and paid for by the state into districts and schools that needed the most help and catch up. So that's exactly what we've done. We put a provision in the Arkansas LEARNS Act to provide 120 literacy coaches paid for by the state, and that will work directly for the state, that will be deployed into districts all over Arkansas to help those students, help catch them up, and also provide a resource for teachers to lean on. When a teacher is responsible for 20 to 25 students, having to stop the entire class to catch those one or two up can hold back the students who are doing exceptional. So by having a partner that can join them in the process, as a literacy coach can, it allows the exceptional students to continue to rise, but also help us catch those students up that are falling behind. One of the other things that we did was included tutoring grants of up to $500. So those students who need additional time, either before, during, or after school. We provided funding so that their parents, their teachers, their counselors can help them by putting them in a program to receive additional assistance. That was another one of the things that we saw that was really successful in another state. And one of the thing that I think, as you mentioned, probably catches a lot of people off guard, and we had some pushback, was not moving students forward from third grade to fourth grade if they aren't meeting that critical benchmark. However, there's a whole lot more context that has to be added. We didn't just say, oh, you didn't make it, best of luck, try again. No, we said we're going to come around you and provide wraparound services for those students so that over the course of the end of the year, over the summer, we are working extensively to catch them up, ideally so that they do get to move forward to fourth grade. What would be absolutely ridiculous and frankly would just be a complete failure is if we said, you know what, you didn't make it in third grade, we're going to put you right back into this system that has already failed you once. But instead, we are providing additional resources and again, wraparound services for those students so that they are getting a much more intense immersion services to help catch them up so that they ideally spend those next couple months and move up with the rest of their class. There are also a number of waivers and exceptions for students with special needs and other factors that might play in that would allow those students to continue to move forward. But simply doing nothing is not acceptable and is not an answer. We had to bring about drastic reform. I think that's what we have done through the Arkansas Learns Act. And I think it's one of the most critical and important pieces of the legislation, frankly, that doesn't get talked about near enough because we know it's such a critical game changer for students all across the state.
So while we're on the subject of improving education, I think one of the important components of Learns also was around teacher raises. We've seen a number of headlines around that, including, I believe, the possibility that teachers in Arkansas could move from essentially last in the country in pay to first, depending on level and experience and those sorts of things. That competes with some headlines we're seeing right now where schools are having trouble filling or recruiting teachers. And so I wonder if you could speak to the raise component of that, how that will be implemented, and then ultimately what the hope is there.
Absolutely. It's no question that the direct success to so many students is tied to the success of a great teacher. I'm sitting here today because I had amazing teachers who forced me to be better, who pushed me to excel and go beyond what I knew I was capable or what I thought I was capable of doing because they believed in me. And we need all of those amazing teachers that we have in Arkansas, one, to stay in the classroom, and those that are thinking about doing it, we need them to join the ranks and be part of that process. So making sure we took steps not only to retain, but also to recruit the best and the brightest and hardest working public servants out there in our teachers was incredibly important in this process. So we looked at what we needed to do to be competitive. And one of the most important things was raising that base pay. But it wasn't simply just giving new teachers a raise. It was making sure that every single teacher in the state of Arkansas received a raise. That was something that was really important to the members of our legislature, as well as to our team, was making sure that every teacher was rewarded. It's not just the paycheck, it's also the message that we're sending, is that we understand your importance, we see the value that you bring to the table, and we want to make sure you know that we feel that way. And so by elevating Arkansas from being, frankly, 48th in the country to starting pay to top 5, and when you adjust for cost of living, we're number 1 in the country for starting pay now for teachers here in the state of Arkansas. That makes us competitive with California, Texas, New York, Florida. Literally every state in the country, our teachers' starting pay is now at a competitive rate. And that's a big thing for a state like Arkansas. And so doing that was really important, but also adding those teachers who have been in the classroom for a long time. We made it sure that every single teacher in the state would receive at least a $2,000 pay increase. And there's some pushback that maybe we're not rewarding the teachers who have been there long enough. those teachers should continue to get pay raises. We've provided additional and even greater flexibility to districts so they can do exactly that, so they can reward their veteran teachers. We also provided up to $10,000 in merit and incentive pay. Some of that is growth and achievement based, but some of that pay is also for teachers who are willing to go into those high demand areas like math, literacy, as well as high demand geographic locations, places where it's harder to recruit some of those teachers. So there are incentive-based pay for those things as well, up to $10,000, that in large part will benefit a lot of our veteran teachers. In addition to that, we also included not only the language, but the funding. The key part is that the state is footing the bill, not just for 1 or 2 years, but in perpetuity for these raises. Every dollar that a district was receiving prior to LEARNs, they receive, and now they're going to get additional significant funding on top of that. One of the, I think, biggest misconceptions is that this is somehow not positive for public education, when in reality, this is the largest investment we've made in public education in decades. And so it is a very big positive step in bolstering public education across the state. But one of the other things included in that is part of that kind of teacher package was also helping pay and cover the tuition for teachers as they go into the classroom. The state is willing to take on those teachers' loans and make sure that those are reimbursed, so even more of their money is going directly into their pocket. So putting those incentives to keep our best and brightest in the classroom was really important. And this isn't the end. It's the first step, and it's a very important one, but it gives us a place to build from and continue to add on to from here.
While we're on the subject of funding, I think one of the recent headlines was the state has a surplus north of $1 billion. I have some ideas on how we could spend that. We'll talk after this is over. But I wonder, for you, have you identified some areas where we could invest some of that? Certainly don't want to spend all of it, but where are the greatest needs there?
Certainly, I wish that the sole decision was up to me and I got to just decide, but I get to work with a lot of my good friends and partners in the legislature on how we can do that. Certainly, I have some key priority areas, as I know they do as well. I want to continue to invest in education because I know it's one of the biggest difference makers and the best places as a state that we can invest. One of the other things that I mentioned earlier that I want to continue to do is responsibly phase out the state income tax. Things like this allow us to do that. We want to continue putting more money back into the pockets of Arkansans all over the state. And I think that we will have the opportunity to do that over the coming months.
You mentioned the state income tax, and of course the rallying cry for a lot of people is, oh my God, we don't want to become Kansas, because we've seen what happens if you don't cut responsibly. Cutting taxes is often seen as a way to drive economic development. And I wonder, what are some other creative ways that we can attract industry, both recruit and retain, beyond income tax cuts?
Certainly don't want to be like Kansas. We are very competitive in that space, and that's, I think, one of the key reasons that we have to do it slowly and over time, and can't just flip a switch and make it happen overnight, even though we'd like to. But it is something we have to work towards and strive towards, and I think we can ultimately get there. Other things that we can do that I think really help us change and grow economically, far and away, the number one thing I hear from every single business owner, every area of the state, it doesn't matter what type of industry you're in or what part of Arkansas you live in, the number one thing that every business owner will tell me that their challenge is workforce. So our task, and one of the biggest things that we can do, is help step up and build a skilled, qualified workforce. One, that's why education is so important as a foundation, because that's where it starts. If we don't get that right, all the other things we want to see happen, frankly, they won't matter. We can try to recruit all the companies in the world that we want, but if we don't have actual workers that are skilled, qualified, and ready to step in and do the jobs that they're bringing, frankly, it doesn't matter. So addressing that shortage has to be a huge priority. It's why one of the very first things I did as governor was sign an executive order creating the workforce cabinet. I was shocked when the very first time I sat down with some of the leaders in agencies that are tasked with working on workforce development. There are 7 different state agencies that have a workforce, either office or component, under their umbrella. And I asked them, how often do you meet? And the guy said, well, we've never met. I said, I don't understand. How is that possible that this is literally the job that each of you have and you've never sat down at a table together and talked about what one another is doing? And he said, well, I don't know, we haven't. And out of that conversation, the workforce cabinet was created. And not only are they tasked with actually sitting around the table talking about what they're doing, what's working, what's not working, but they have metrics and measurements that they have to meet. We don't want to just throw ideas out there. We want to make data-based informed decisions. And so that's what we're doing. There are things that we know that work. There are things we know that don't. But really leaning into this space has been a big priority. We also created a position called the Chief Workforce Officer, and I hired a guy named Mike Rogers out of the private sector who had been working for one of the biggest companies here in the state for the last 2 decades, going out recruiting and helping them find and train talent within their company. And so we took somebody with that private sector knowledge, brought them in and married them up with state government. And that's one of the biggest things, is bringing all the stakeholders to the table. So often education operates in a silo over here, your economic development team is in a silo over here, your universities and community colleges, they don't even talk to each other, and they're in 2 totally different silos. Your business leaders, your community leaders, they're not all sitting at the same table saying, here's the problem, what are we going to do to work together to meet that demand and figure out the solution? And so that's what we've done. I think that Arkansas has the ability to, frankly, really draw the blueprint and show the country what it looks like to do workforce development correctly. And I feel very confident that we're going to be able to really change the game, and that will be one of the biggest things that differentiates us, not only from keeping companies that we already have here to grow and to expand, but also the ability to recruit and bring new investment and new business into the state of Arkansas.
Switching gears, I have one more question, then we'll open up to you guys.
Well, that's all the time we have for today.
Gotta go?
I'm just kidding.
While we're on the subject of economic development, it's been no secret that the outdoor economy has been a big focal point. We had the opportunity to hear from the first gentleman and others a few months ago about the Outdoor Council. I'm curious, and you alluded to this some in the State of the State address to kick us off, but why was this personally important to you, and how do you see this actually being a driver of economic development for the state?
I think one of the biggest ways is right now our tourism industry is our number 2 industry in the state. And growing that helps us do some of the other things that we want to see happen. Invest more in education, invest more in public safety, phase out our state income tax. As much as I wish that we could cut government enough to get rid of our state income tax, that's just not the reality. You can't cut your way out of that. You're going to have to grow different sectors of our economy. And one of the biggest and most unique selling propositions we have as a state is our outdoor economy. And one of the most amazing things about it is it's something that can be enjoyed year-round. A lot of other states can't tell that story the way that Arkansas can. There's a reason that Arkansas's nickname and our motto is the natural state. It's because we have unbelievable natural resources and natural beauty right here in Arkansas. And we need more people to understand that here in our state, but also around the country, and come experience what Arkansas has to offer, whether it's hiking, biking, fishing, hunting. There's so many, bird watching, I've learned is actually a very big industry in the state of Arkansas to bring people in to spend their time and their money in our state parks, our restaurants, our hotels. All of those areas benefit by our tourism industry. And we have, like I said, unbelievable natural beauty, and we should be experiencing it ourselves and helping other people see what we have to offer and growing that industry as much as possible.
All right. Thank you. we're going to open it up to the floor for member questions.
Well, that
and
was
I think
quick, Kenny.
we
I
have
don't know.
runners. We have runners with mics.
All right, Kenny.
He looked way too prepared and excited to ask a question.
Front row seat.
So I first want to, forgive my voice, I first want to thank you for leading by example with your intern program, because you have given kids the opportunity to start careers, of which we're going to have a meeting coming up shortly. So thank you for doing that. My question is, in the perfect world, not holding your feet to the fire on this, what would you love to have as the progression of the reduction of that state income tax? So we've done a quarter, we've done a half, I understand you got to adjust that based on a lot of factors, but in your perfect world, what would you like to see?
I mean, in a perfect world, I'd like to see it at 0. I think you have to be careful because the economy and the environment can shift, and that's why we have to do it over time, and we can't just immediately take it to 0. The good news is Arkansas's economy is really strong. It's doing very well. People are working, and Arkansas is rising, which means we have more of an ability to do it faster. I'd like to see it during my time as governor, certainly, over the course of the next 7.5 years. But I think the key is not doing it fast or on a specific timeline, but it's making sure that we get it right so that we don't hurt programs and care that we offer through the state. So is my diplomatic answer, Kenny, of saying I'm not going to answer that question completely. So.
Oh, go ahead.
I'd like to ask about the aviation and aerospace industry and what you see in its future, and if you could expand upon how your trip to the Le Bourget Air Show was.
Absolutely. I think this is one of the spaces that Arkansas has so much opportunity. One thing that a lot of people probably don't know is now our #1 export, just over $1 billion, is our aerospace industry, and it is absolutely booming, and I think it will only continue to grow and expand from where we are right now. We had the opportunity to travel with Secretary McDonnell and Clint O'Neill, the head of AEDC, to the Paris Air Show and meet with leaders in aerospace and technology industry from literally all over the world, and they love working in Arkansas. Some of the biggest names in this space already have operations here, and I expect us to be able to announce expansions of some of those operations as well as the recruitment of new ones over the next couple of years. This is an incredible opportunity. That industry is doing this. It's not going anywhere. It's going to continue to grow, and I want it to grow right here in Arkansas, and I think we have all of the components necessary. But I will say the biggest thing, and I already mentioned it, so I don't want to sound too much like a broken record, that we heard from every single one of those meetings that we sat down with is we need Arkansas to step up on the workforce side. And so we heard their request, and we're going to do everything we can to meet that demand and make sure Arkansas not only meets expectations but exceeds them when it comes to workforce and meeting the needs that industry has.
So what I wanted to ask about, going back to literacy, and I applaud you for those efforts because I agree, it is a huge problem. But we have some incredibly rural parts of the state, as we all know. So some of those services that can wrap around kids in central Arkansas, northwest Arkansas, and other more populated parts of the state, those services exist. But is there an effort for the companies that provide some of those services to move into some of the more rural parts of the state? Any incentives to get them to do that? And then how could we as business help achieve that and help those children? I know several of us have helped, kind of coaching, but that's not that intense work those children need. So how can we, get those companies moving into all parts of our state to be able to help those children?
Well, one of the best ways, and thank you for certainly your question and your willingness to help and put some skin in the game, because I think our business and community leaders stepping up and engaging certainly makes a huge difference. The government cannot fix this problem on its own. We certainly can help, but it's going to take that partnership. And so thank you for your willingness to do it. I think one of the big things that helps encourage those types of companies to go is to know that they're going to get paid. And when the state is providing providing the funding for the services, that incentivizes them to want to go into those schools that need it the most when they know on the back end that someone is going to pick up the tab. And the state has committed to doing that. So that's step number one that makes a difference. Also, those 120 literacy coaches, some of those areas will be the number one location that those individuals will be deployed to, because those are some of the spaces that we have the lowest performing numbers that we really need to boost and do that intense kind of immersion services. So those are some of the key pieces, but I think that the community and business leaders working with the schools, helping, stepping up, and being partners in the process will be a huge differentiator for some of those communities having success. However, I think it's really important to note that some of the counties in our state with the very best reading scores are our rural counties. So don't discount just because they are smaller and rural. Those are some of the highest performing areas that we have anywhere in Arkansas. And you would be shocked probably to hear that some of our lowest performing are in some of our more populated areas. And so it's not always just about resources, but we want to make sure that we're doing everything we can from a state perspective to look at where are those lowest performing data points and how do we raise those up so that we're competitive across the state.
Governor, I want to compliment you on all these positive programs you have going, and they're very encouraging. And I hope I'm wrong, but it would seem like to me for us to get to our goals, it'll go past your 7.5 years left. How do you see it continuing after that? Or how do you...
Well, I'd like to think we'll get it all done in 7.5, but what we don't, I think we, have to look to who's next, and our legislators and our community leaders and our business leaders and everyone coming together as a state and focusing on these key priority issues that we know are going to make a difference between whether our state is first, second, and third in education, workforce development, economic development, healthcare, safety, or if we're going to be 48th and 49th. I'm focused on moving us up, and I'm going to do that as quickly as possible and try to get as much done in 7.5 years as I can. Who's after that is probably going to depend a lot more on the people in this room than it is me.
All right, our last question is going to be right here.
Thank you. Sarah, I know we need, the third graders need to be reading so we can develop our workforce. Our sixth graders need to be worked on so they don't graduate, go on up without any education. But we have a workforce out there that needs to be educated, and that's the people that got out of high school and really didn't succeed and didn't go anywhere. We have people coming out of prison. Those people are ready. What are we doing for adult education, adult training, those things that can really create some high-paying jobs? We already have those people sitting there. How do we go get them, and what do we do with them?
I think you're exactly right. It's one of the best pipelines of workers that we can find are these people that we can help bring additional skills and training to so that they're actually in the workforce instead of dependent on the system. That's the ultimate goal. So we've done things that I think help on a high school level, but those individuals, the adult education, we're investing in some of the workforce and training programs at our prisons, working with Secretary Profuri, who is doing a great job of first taking an assessment of where we are, what's working. But one of the biggest things that we didn't have that I think helps put us in a better long-term strategy is we created a job and training database so that we have one central location that individuals who want to go to work, companies who want to hire, a one-stop shop for anybody looking to be part of workforce in some capacity can go. So if you are someone who has graduated from high school but has no additional training or skill that you need to take into the marketplace, you can go and say, look, I want to make $60,000 a year. Here's a job or two that I'm interested in. What does it take to get the training skills I need. Here's where I can go to get it. Here are places that will help pay for me to get that training. And here are jobs that will be available on the back end. So we've created this database. We're still adding to and developing, but people can start to use that as a great resource so that we kind of have that one-stop shop that helps streamline the process so more people have information at their fingertips. That's a good starting place, but having more and more people engage in that system, people who are ready to hire, that are putting those jobs up there, working closely with our community colleges, our trade and our vocational training programs is going to be absolutely critical and key. And we're investing pretty heavily, particularly over the next several months, into those specific programs that will help us, I think, create that pipeline from a very ready, willing, and able group of people that frankly have sat on the sidelines for far too long.
Thank you guys for the questions. Governor Sanders, thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you guys so much. Thank you, Governor Sanders, for spending time with us today. That was really wonderful. Appreciate that. Chris, thank you.